Let's spend a moment on the United States. Gideon Rahman had a piece out where he says that Biden could go down in American history as one of the country's greatest presidents ever. Now, just seeing his mannerisms and his profile, that's not really the sense he conveys that here is one of America's great presidents. How do you assess the Biden presidency, given that it is now increasingly clear that President Biden will seek re-election?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's days or weeks away from announcing formally that he will seek re-election. I think broadly, at a domestic level, he has achieved some great successes. The fact that they were able to pass the Inflation Reduction Act is just seismic. Not only for inflation, even though the effects there were minimal, mostly climate change. I mean, the investments into climate initiatives into green energy are something totaling around $400 billion. That is immense from an American standpoint. I know that European and Asian allies are calling it protectionist, but frankly, you need competition when it comes to climate change, and that's a good thing. Semiconductors, massive, I think $50+ billion investment, really ramping up competition with China there. So there are some big successes. They've managed to get out of COVID in a way that I think was relatively successful compared to the rest of the world. Those are things I think that the people will remember come polling day. Foreign policy is a bit more mixed. I think America's done very well on Ukraine, as much as it could. It is a mystery to me still what America's China policy is. I think this will be the defining foreign policy issue for America over the next 20, 30 years. And what's unclear to me is, does America want to contain China? Does it want China to keep growing and just not be a military threat? Where the rest of the world fits into all of these things, increasingly unclear to me. So the jury's out there.
Let's spend a moment on that. The idea that there could be two blocks. The United States leading one block on one side, China, Russia, Iran on the other, and a second two competing blocks. Now, what we're seeing just recently is China make some mitigating noises. America, too, not very keen on pushing that divide very clear. Do you see China and the United States coming closer or drifting further apart this year?
Oh, they're certainly drifting further apart. There's just no two ways about it. One of the few things Republicans and Democrats agree on is how tough to be on China. I mean, the disagreement is on degrees of should we be tougher or not. That, to me, is frankly a little disappointing to see because, there are sensible analysts who were seen as right of center, and now they are complete doves. The American conversation has moved to the far right on China, where China is no longer seen as just a challenge, but a real threat on a range of metrics. And I think that is bad for cooperation on climate change. It is bad for the rest of the world because, take, for example, the U.S. sanctions on Chinese semiconductors. Partly because of how American business works, how American sanctions work, everyone has to go along. So you could be Microsoft, you've got to shut down your Chinese plants. You could be India, you have to go along with these sanctions, or you will face sanctions of your own. So this American unilateral way of being tough on China is hurting Europeans, it's hurting Asians. Not everyone is going to agree with that path. Not everyone sees the world as bipolar. India, for example, I think sees it as multipolar. So there are rifts along the way.
To what extent do you think this move away from China could potentially help India? There's a lot of talk in India about production limit incentives, the China Plus One, and how India could benefit from it. Do you increasingly see more investments come towards India, or do you see, say, Vietnam, Bangladesh, Indonesia benefiting almost equally just as India does? Or do you see this being really India's moment?
It's a bit of both. So I think India will pick up a lot of things that are moving out of China. India is a increasingly very attractive destination for business, for startups, for alliances, for partnerships. There's all of that. The point I'm trying to make is we're not in a zero-sum world. I don't think hurting China's growth is going to necessarily help the rest of the world. If you look at the last 40 years, you see the commodities boom around the world. You see the rise of Latin America, the rise of many Asian countries. It was linked to Chinese growth. You take Chinese growth off the table, you try to cut China off completely, Tell me how that's good for the rest of the world. I don't think it is. And I think America sees this purely from an American prism of wanting to contain its closest competitor. But for the rest of the world, which needs Chinese growth to fuel other growth, it's going to hurt.